Hi Yogi, and welcome to another Slow Flow with me, Oceana. In this particular class, we're heading into our third week, exploring the 5 main pairs of meridian lines that run through the body according to traditional Chinese medicine. And in this week, we're specifically focusing on the kidney and bladder meridians, which of course, again, there's one of them, in this case the kidneys, represents the yin organ, and the other represents the yang organ, which here is the bladder. So the kidneys really are possibly considered the most powerful organ according to TCM, because they are able to metabolize. So they're sort of distilling qi from the air that we breathe, and qi is very much the energy that keeps us alive. And they also store a sort of refined version of qi, which is our qi essence known as Jing. And the bladder then uses the qi energy that it gets from the kidneys in order to release excess water from the body, which you might be familiar with that process. We won't go into too much detail here. So, of course, we are sort of exploring these lines through a yang to yin practice, which means the first half of our class will be a little bit more dynamic. We're sort of activating these different areas of the body in a more active way. And finally, we'll use that sort of heat that we build in our physical practice in order to dive a little bit deeper into stillness in our yin postures, where we're really applying acupressure to the inner thighs as well as the spine to hopefully stimulate these meridian lines. In terms of props, if you don't have a yoga mat, which you can sort of roll up at the end, I do suggest that today, because we're sort of working into the hips a little bit, you might like to have just a couple of pillows, maybe some blankets, something to help you sort of support the backs of the legs or the knees, wherever you need that support. And when you're ready, we will start lying on the front of the body, so all the way on the belly, and you can join me there once you've gathered your props. So once you arrive on your belly, take the elbows out wide, and you might choose to have one hand on top of the other so that you can rest the forehead on the backs of the hands, or instead you could stack your fists and rest the head there if that feels more comfortable. Really allow the shoulders to be heavy and let your attention rest for a few rounds on the movement of your breathing. So really feel how the front of the body is connecting into the floor as you breathe in, and how the body is sort of softening and shifting around as you exhale. And as you continue to breathe here, let your mind just briefly wander through the different layers of yourself, taking a little bit of a moment to check in with ourselves here at the beginning of practice. So you might just briefly notice any parts of your physical body that are sort of calling to you, that might be asking for a little bit of attention, and possibly noticing any aches or pains, any niggles in the joints, the muscles. Or if none of that is present, really allowing a little bit of time to notice areas that feel sort of particularly easeful, soft, generously spacious. And equally, taking that same amount of time just to briefly notice any particular thoughts that are already present to you here at the beginning of class. Notice any emotions that are already with you. And once you sort of have this bullet point list, it's something that we can refer back to at the end of our practice, but also something that really tells us where we're at before we even begin. So what might our practice look like if we have all of these things going on right now? When you're ready, slowly bring the hands underneath the shoulders. Press yourself up into a tabletop position, so on 2 hands and knees. And from there, we'll come into a brief child's pose. So the knees can be wide, the big toes touch, and you might walk the hands forward, really pressing the sitting bones back. allowing yourself a little bit of a counter posture here to crocodile pose. Inhale, rise up into tabletop. So adjust yourself so that the hands are underneath the shoulders, the knees are underneath the hips. We'll come through a couple of tabletop circles. So you're just circling the shoulders and hips on top of the wrists and knees. You're going to pick one direction and gradually make the circles a little bit bigger over time. So possibly, eventually, you find that the sitting bones could go all the way back towards the heels or thereabouts. Maybe the wrists come all the way past, rather the shoulders come all the way past your wrists. The other way around would be a little bit strange. And you might really allow the rib cage to move to the side as you take the circles to the left and right. Eventually, we're going to reverse our circles. So a couple of times we're just going the other direction. Maybe starting small and sort of gradually exploring whether we can soften the elbows and allow that movement to come a little bit more expansive, a little bit wider. And eventually we'll meet in the center here. We're going to tuck under the left toes and send the left heel back, having a little bounce forwards and back, shifting our body weight from that left foot into the hands and back again. Just a few times, finding this little pulsating movement. And eventually you're going to keep pushing into the hands to lengthen the back of the left leg, opening the muscles in the back of the calf, maybe all the way into the Achilles tendon and the bottom of the foot. And from there, spin your left heel to the floor, sweep your left arm forward and all the way over your head. Allow that top left shoulder to slightly roll back and maybe even look up towards the ceiling. Now, with your top left hand, you might turn the palm up towards the ceiling. And if you soften the lower elbow, you find that you possibly are coming a little bit deeper into that side bend, really feeling the effects on the left hip, into the left rib cage, and finding a few deep breaths here, expanding the breath sideways as you breathe in. Slowly take this top hand, bring it all the way forward. Walk the hands in front of your hips. And you'll want to spin your right foot behind the knee here. So the bottom foot goes behind the knee. Slowly take your sitting bones back as you walk the fingertips further forward and away from you. Possibly staying on sort of tented hands. So your fingertips are on the floor, the heels of the hands are lifted. And from there, sinking the center of your chest towards the floor. So we're creating just a little bit more space at the front of the body in the chest, as well as finding quite a deep stretch to the inside of the left leg. Last breath here, soften as you exhale. And from there, as you inhale, push the floor away, walk the hands back in. Now, bend your left knee and turn the toes towards the back of the room, towards the back of your mat rather. Your left hand could come to the inside of the foot, and this time the right arm could sweep up and overhead. And if that doesn't feel quite comfortable, let the left elbow rest on the top of your thigh so that you can really find this expansion through the top arm, reaching across. And focus on lifting through the chest. Again, maybe find that gentle rolling of the top shoulder moving back as you look up. And eventually here we're going to unravel ourselves. So you might have the hands briefly on the floor so that you can send your right toes behind you. And from there, lift the arms to find a low lunge position, Asana. And the hips could come a little bit further forward and down, as long as you can check that the center of your front knee is sort of moving across the second and third toe. But now, as the hips come a little bit lower, the center of your chest lifts a little bit taller. So creating that space in the center of the body as the ribs and hips move in opposite directions. Slowly let your right hand travel forward and across, grabbing hold of the outside of your front knee, maybe allowing the left arm to rest on top of your left hip. And from there, rolling left shoulder back, right shoulder moves a little bit closer towards your left thigh. Finding the breath growing nice and tall through the center of the head. And maybe as you exhale, looking over the back shoulder if the balance is easy, catching a breath. And on an inhale, slowly unwinding yourself, lifting the fingertips towards the ceiling. And from here, slowly see if you can push into the back heel to float the back knee away from the ground to come into a high lunge. So nothing else changes. We've just lifted the back knee. On an inhale, straighten the front leg, really reach through the fingertips. As you exhale, bend the elbows, open the chest to come into cactus arms. Inhale, straighten the front leg, lift up, reach through the sides of the waist. As you exhale, bend the front knee, bend the elbows. Last time here, moving with the breath, maybe as you come back down, looking a little bit taller into your back bend, opening through the front of the chest, lifting a little bit higher. On your next inhale, lift up, plant the hands to frame your front foot. And from there, push the hands underneath the shoulders to step your front foot all the way back into a high plank position. From there, lower the knees really gently to the floor. Now, let your shoulders come on top of the wrist, tuck the elbows in towards the ribs, and then let the center of the chest move towards the floor. So the sitting bones stay lifted. We're coming into Ashtanga Namaskara. And if there's no neck issues, let the chin look forward and untuck from the chest. Slowly here, slide your hips through. Let the hips come to the floor and then lift the shoulders up and back into Cobra pose. So the front of the chest is lifted. You're rolling the elbows back. On an exhale, tuck under your toes, push down through the hands to lift up into tabletop and take your sitting bones all the way back into an active child's pose. Inhale, push into your toes. Let the spine round, so you're coming through a cat stretch here until the shoulders come on top of the wrists. And from there, maybe you can allow the hips to come forward and down into seal pose, possibly even pushing your heels away to come into upward dog. And if you're there, if the thighs are off the ground, see if you could draw the hips a little bit more forward and lift through the center of the chest. Now we're going to be a little bit funky here and see if we can shift our body weight into the right foot, picking up the left leg, and then drawing the left knee into the chest for a tiger's curl. As you inhale, send the left leg up and back into three-legged dog. Catch a breath here, really reach through that top big toe. As you inhale, come forward into a three-point plank. Bring your shoulders on top of the wrists. Hover there, hold it, and slowly bring the right knee to the floor with a sigh of relief, I bet. Let your left leg lift up towards the ceiling. You might walk your hands a little bit closer here, and then see if you could float the right fingertips forward, shifting your body weight into the right knee and the left hand. Possibly from there, right hand could reach back and possibly even catch the foot. Now, if that's happened, see if you can send the foot away from yourself, coming into half bow. So really by pushing the foot back, we're opening the front of the hip as well as the front of the shoulder. And again, creating that space between the ribs and the hip joint. Gently, gently bend the top knee to release the leg. Plant your hands on the floor. Plant the knees to the ground and briefly take it into a child's pose as a counter posture. Allow the crown of the head to rest. Maybe have a little shimmy from side to side, releasing any tension in the hips. And eventually from here, we'll have to do all of that on the second side. So hopefully you're ready. We're going to come back into our tabletop. This time tucking under the right toes, and again seeing if we can find a little bit this bounce forwards and back between the hands and that foot. So just shifting our body weight, maybe easing a little bit into the muscles at the back of the right leg, and eventually pushing into the hands, keeping the weight moving back into that right leg, seeing if we can open up the calf, the back of the Achilles, the bottom of the foot. And from there, spin the heel to the floor. Let your right arm sweep all the way over the head so that you can roll that right shoulder behind you. Lean a little bit back, maybe even turn the right palm towards the ceiling and soften your bottom elbow so that you're coming a little bit deeper into that opening along the right rib cage, all the way into the right hip. Catch the breath. Find that deep, deep opening through the sides of the ribs as you breathe in. And gently bring your top hand all the way down. Walk the hands in front of your hips. And you're going to turn again your left foot behind the left knee, tucking it under. Walk the fingertips forward as you sink the hips back. So coming into a sort of, I usually refer to this as half puppy pose. In normal puppy pose, we would have both knees on the floor. And from there, you might walk the fingertips forward. Again, my suggestion would be to stay on the tips of your fingers. And from there, allow the center of the chest to move towards the ground. Allow the front of the body to soften down, finding a little bit of a deeper stretch through the inside of your right thigh. And hopefully not forgetting to breathe. Mostly I'm often saying that as a reminder to myself rather than you. But of course, if you've forgotten to breathe as well, join me in the club. Slowly as you inhale, push the floor away, rise back up, walk the hands in. Now from here, turn the right toes to point back towards the front of your yoga mat, bend the right knee. Right hand can come to the inside of the foot. Maybe you're circling the left arm up and over the head to come into this low side angle position. Or if you prefer, bring the right forearm onto the thigh and then really push that forearm away so that you're, again, it's almost as if you're puffing out the left side of your ribs here. Maybe looking up, maybe allowing this top shoulder to roll behind you, lifting through the chest. Gently here, let the top hand come down. Briefly bring the hands to the floor so that you can unravel your left foot and point the toes behind you. On an inhale, lift up through the fingertips. Find your low lunge on the second side. This time really allowing again the hips to move forward and down, just briefly checking that the knee is moving over your second and third toe. And then allowing almost a sense that the hips are moving forward and down, but you're resisting that by pulling and lifting the chest a little bit taller. And the shoulder blades here are sort of drawing down towards the spine, really supporting the upper back and possibly giving you even more of a lift. So you can kind of squeeze the shoulder blades towards the spine to find that lift in the upper body. Gently, gently tuck under your toes. Send your left hand forward and across to the outside of your front knee. Let the right hand possibly rest on the lower back, or wrap it towards the opposite hip. Now as you inhale, see if the crown of your head could lift and lengthen a little bit taller. And as you exhale, maybe look towards the back of the room, find that twist. Again, the inhale draws us up and the exhale deepens the twist if there's space. Slowly unravel yourself as you breathe in. Lift the hands and from there maybe push into your back toes to lift the knee. You can always use hands on the floor if that's a little bit more accessible. Now straighten the front leg. As you exhale, bend the front knee, bend the elbows into cactus arms. Inhale to lift everything up towards the ceiling and exhale to soften down into that bend. Last time here, move with the breath. Then as you lift up, plant the hands on the floor to frame your front foot. Hands underneath the shoulders, we push the floor away and see if we can retract this front foot all the way back into a high plank position, lowering the knees very gently here. Again, the elbows tuck really tightly in towards the ribs so that we can, with control, bring the chest to the floor. If there's any neck pain, keep the chin tucked in. Otherwise, let the eyes travel forward. Let the chin reach towards the front of your yoga mat. Slide your way through onto the hips. Untuck your toes and let the shoulders roll back. Point the elbows towards your feet. And then lift through the front of the body and really feel those two really strong sets of muscles either side of the spine kicking in. Slowly as you exhale, release the chest down, tuck under the toes. Send yourself back into an active child's pose. Move the sitting bones towards the heels. Really push from the hands to round the back of the body. And from there, press into the toes to let the spine travel forward through that rounded position of your cat stretch. All the way until the hips can move forward and down, releasing into seal, or you're keeping the toes tucked under and pushing your heels back to lift the thighs away from the floor, sort of unfurling the spine forward into our upward dog. Now from here, shifting our body weight across into the left foot, seeing if we can float the right toes away from the ground, and then drawing the right knee in towards the chest. Hugging it into our tiger's curl. As you inhale, let the leg lift up and back into your three-legged dog. Really push through the hands, lengthen through the big toe. Let your shoulders come forward into a three-point plank. Keep hovering the right leg. And then maybe gently lower the knee to the floor. Bend your right knee. You might have to walk the hands in just a touch here. And let your left fingertips reach forward. As you exhale, choose whether you're going to stay here or possibly reach the left hand behind you, catch the foot. And if you do catch the foot, push the foot away from you to find your half bow. Bottom elbow is soft and you're opening through the front of the chest, hip and leg. Finding the breath. And then gently, gently release the grip of that hand, soften the knee. Plant your left hand underneath the shoulder and we come back into our child's pose, but possibly if child's pose is fairly comfortable for you, you could have the knees together, big toes touching, and then walk the hands towards the feet, rounding the forehead in towards your knees. So really allowing the back of the body to come into this deep counter posture. Slowly as you inhale, let your spine round to come up to a kneeling position, and from here we'll simply slip the feet out from underneath us to come to sitting. So of course, for those of you who know that sitting on the floor with your legs in front of you is really an uncomfortable place to be in, make sure that you support your sitting bones. You can roll up your yoga mat, slide that underneath you, or you can grab some pillows. Maybe you've got some blankets or even some yoga bricks that could help support you a little bit higher up. And from here, we'll come into butterfly pose to begin with. So you can have the soles of the feet together, and in the yin version of this posture, you want about 2 hand lengths distance from the heels of your feet towards the torso. So I'm always quite generous with the amount of distance I give myself here. Some of you, if you do have an Ashtanga practice, you'll be used to the heels being right all the way to the torso. So I suggest that you just give this a go. If you have a huge amount of gap between the backs of the knees and the floor, then again, that could be something that you can slide some pillows underneath or a little bit of a blanket support so that you can really allow the inside of your thighs to relax, to let the muscles soften throughout the whole of your legs and really find a little bit of release through the legs. You could have the fingertips behind you, and from there pushing into the fingertips, lifting through the chest, maybe staying here and closing the eyes. Some of you might like to fold forwards, in which case you can bring the hands onto the shins and that might still be enough. Or you can slowly walk the fingertips in front of your legs, maybe even resting the hands on top of your feet, and from there allowing the forehead to soften down. But you really don't want to have to bend your spine really quite drastically to get there. You want to work with a fairly straight spine, keeping the vertebra long, finding that length through the front and back of the body. So we're sort of keeping the torso pretty even as we settle into this pose. And really allowing ourselves just a little bit of time to arrive, making any small adjustments or movements that we need to, and then truly settling into complete stillness. And as you arrive in this first posture, sort of notice immediately what the inclination is for your mind. So is the mind really immediately drawn to certain things? And if that's true, then what are those things? Is it parts of yourself that are feeling a little bit tense in this pose? Is it particular trails of thoughts? Or are there certain emotions that are really grasping at your attention? So really in our yin practice, we become almost like a third-party observer, really noticing what's going on when we're not actively moving, what's happening to the body. And gently on your next inhale, press the floor away, slowly, slowly rise all the way up to a seated position. And from there, support the backs of the knees here to slide the legs in. And we'll have just briefly the feet about as wide as your yoga mat, so about shoulder distance. Hands can go behind you, just having a little windscreen wiper of the legs going from left to right a few times, sort of releasing the tension in the hips. And we'll prepare for straddle here. So if you're more of a traditional yogi, then you might know this as Upavishta Konasana, your wide-legged seated forward fold. And the main thing that's a little bit different here in your yin practice is that you can allow your feet to relax. So the toes can be floppy and you can have the legs as wide as is comfortable or as close together as you like. The knees can be straight, or you might prefer to keep the knees bent. And from there you can grab hold of the shin bones and sit nice and tall, and that can be a pretty deep practice as well, because even as someone who's really, I would say, quite flexible, I am feeling quite a bit of sensation through the insides of my thighs here, which is really where we want to be feeling this pose. So we'll start with a little bit of a side bend action. So again, if the knees are bent, you can keep them bent, but we're going to plant the right hand to the floor and allow the left arm to lift over the head, finding a little bit of that rolling back of the top shoulder just for a few rounds of breath here. Really seeing if we can send the breath into both sides of the ribs equally, even though we're compressing the right side of the ribs. And then take it all the way across. So let your left hand travel to the inside of the left knee. Let the right arm come up and over the head. Maybe let that shoulder sort of relax towards the space behind you. And maybe reach a little bit more through the fingertips to find this opening through the right side. And then really find that deep, deep inhale. Expand the lungs. Soften on your exhale. On your next inhale, you use the top hand, lift back up through center. Frame your right leg, and this time we're going to come forward and fold. So you might walk the hands a little bit closer to yourself, staying a little bit taller, especially if this already feels quite intense for the hamstrings. If you do want to work a little bit deeper, of course, you can slowly soften. Maybe some of you are catching your foot and possibly even allowing the head to rest on the leg. For your last few moments here, see if you can keep the breath becoming a little bit longer with each inhale and each exhale as you linger a little bit more towards the end of every breath. And through that softness, that fluidity in the breath, possibly finding that same fluidity, that same release through the muscle tissue and the ligaments and tendons. Maybe activating a little bit more of that fluidity, that water-like quality in the bones. On your next inhale, the hands come back to the floor. And you walk the hands in so that you can come all the way into a seated position, and we'll take it across to the other side. So again, we start simply by framing the left leg with both hands, turning a little bit our belly button and the center of the chest towards that direction. We could, again, stay a little bit taller, exactly where we are, or some of us might start to lean forward, possibly allowing the hands to rest, maybe softening the elbows, maybe even catching the foot. And if we're there, really allowing the forehead to rest on top of the thigh or knee, maybe the shin bone. And if there's areas of ourselves that have sort of immediately tensed up as we have arrived here, which for me, my left leg, immediately the toes were sort of flexing back towards my face, and because I had my hand there, I was quite consciously aware of it. So if that's happened for you, if there's certain parts of yourself that sort of immediately tightened up, see if you can become a little bit more aware of that sort of reaction and allow, as you exhale, for those spaces, those parts of yourself to relax and give in to a little bit of softness and stillness. Let the breath guide you towards that. Slowly, as you breathe in, walk the hands towards yourself, come into an upright position. Now from here again, hands underneath the knees this time, pull the legs back as you lean back, feet as wide as your mat, fingertips pointing behind you, and just having a little windscreen wiper action from the left to the right a few times. We will close the physical part of our practice with caterpillar pose. So again, it's one last forward fold, quite hip-centric here today, but also just sort of restores a little bit of balance after we've done quite a lot of back bends in our more dynamic young practice. So when you're ready, again, you could have the knees bent, you could wrap the arms around the legs and let the forehead hang down towards the floor. If you do want to go a little bit further, you might slide the heels away from you. You might keep the belly on top of the thighs, and I actually quite like to hold on to the legs here and have the heels at least hip distance, if not shoulder distance, so a little bit more space so that my torso and particularly my belly can sort of rest between the thighs. And if you're there, you can either walk the sitting bones back or let the heels move a little bit further forward and really round the forehead towards the floor, coming into your caterpillar, or for the traditional yogis, this is our Paschimottanasana, our seated forward fold. And because we're sort of rounding the spine a little bit more, we're getting a deeper stretch into the muscles at the back of the body, which, as I said, we've done a lot of back bending, and particularly when we do things like locust pose or cobra, we feel that very, very strong engagement of the muscles either side of the spine. There's sort of almost these, you can imagine them like tubes of muscles either side that feel quite intensely active when we lift away from the floor against gravity. And here, sort of the opposite is happening. We're really trying to give in to gravity and seeing if we can lengthen those muscles, giving them a little bit of a release, finding a little bit of softness through those tissues over time, and really observing how the sensations in these sort of particular points of the body gradually shift as we stay a little bit longer. So maybe for some of you, you could slide yourself a little bit further down, adjust the posture for your last few moments here. Slowly as you inhale, let the spine round as you come up to sitting. From here, hands behind you, simply bend the knees and slip your sitting bones a little bit lower. Plant the feet to the floor and slowly let your spine travel vertebra by vertebra towards the floor. Slowly releasing the shoulders and head to the ground, and from there just briefly straighten the legs, Give yourself a little bit of a rest. Maybe let the hands lie on top of the belly so that you can feel again just that movement of the breath as you inhale, and notice how your relationship to your breathing changes now that we're on the back of the body. So we started the class on the front, and that gives us really a very different relationship to our breath, a different experience of it. Now on the back of the body, this might feel a little bit more familiar, but actually how you're sort of engaging with the breath is probably quite drastically different, and what you're noticing might be drastically different as well. So just give yourself a little bit of time to sort of take this final reading of your breath, and then allow a little bit of time to again return to some of the things you noticed at the beginning. So any physical sensations in the body that might be the same as they were at the beginning, or they could be a little bit different here. What are the types of thoughts that are going through your mind? Are they still sort of around the same topic or the same theme as the beginning of your practice, or is something slightly different going on there? And finally, checking in with the emotions, so any particular emotions that are sort of bubbling up here at the end, which would be really normal for most of us when we do back bending. It comes with a lot of emotions. And then we did a lot of hip opening, which again comes with a lot of emotional attachments. For some of us, those two options will feel quite maybe the body is quite unwilling to go there. So maybe allowing the hips to be open is uncomfortable. Maybe going into a back bend of any kind is uncomfortable or has a little bit of a fear factor to it. So just noticing that that's what's going on for us. And then gently here, we'll slowly bend the knees, drawing them in towards the chest, hugging the knees in with our arms and having a little roll from side to side. Massaging the back of the body, and eventually left arm goes over the head. We'll roll all the way onto the left side, using the right arm to support ourselves here, maybe having a few rounds of breath, allowing our attention to drift back into the room, and slowly pushing into the top hand, rising up to a comfortable seated position. And this is where we're going to close the practice. So you might like to bring your palms to touch in front of the chest, bowing the forehead towards the fingertips. You could use this last moment just to give yourself a little bit of gratitude, a little bit of a thanks for showing up on your yoga mat and taking this time, dedicating it to yourself, to your well-being. And finally, you might wish to plant a sankalpa, a good intention for yourself or for somebody else in your life that you truly care for. Namaste, yogi. And thank you so much for joining me in your practice today. I hope you enjoyed the class. Of course, if you did, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Share it with your friends so that we can grow this wonderful community of yogis. Of course, if you have any feedback, suggestions or comments, please feel free to drop me a line down below. And if you want to find me anywhere else online, in the meantime, my social media links are in the video description. Hopefully, I will see you back on your mat very soon, yogi. And again, thank you so much for making it all the way to the end. Bye.